Well, everybody, this is going to be a really special episode because I've have so many questions I've been dying to find the answers to, and my guest today is going to help us with that. Welcome, Carol, to the Flower Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Can't wait to talk flowers.
I know, me too. Oh, well, always. And so it's fascinating what you do and what you're a part of. It's such a huge thing. And how did you find your way into this world of flowers and gardening with the Farmer's Almanac? I should say the Old Farmer's Almanac.
And we all have our history, don't we? So actually, the Old Farmer's Almanac is owned by Yankee Publishing, and I'm what's called a boomerang. I worked there over 20 years ago on the Yankee magazine side, and I was actually the home and food and garden editor. And so I actually started out really kind of as a young gardener getting experience and listening to writers, garden writers, and having them give us stories, and so learning a lot that way. But like you, I was reading about your background. My grandmother was a gardener, and so my mom and my sister, so a lot of family influence. And then in publishing, I worked in at a university for 20 years, and then I came back to Yankee Publishing to do this job. And that whole time I've been farming and gardening of all sorts. But the fun part was that I worked at a library, the tallest academic library in the world, and it has a beautiful courtyard. And my colleague was the person who installed this gorgeous garden in the courtyard. And so we called the group the Deadheaders. It's the volunteers. So for 15 years, I got to work alongside, master gardeners and just people on staff that volunteered. And all the time we would be thinning plants and bringing them home and learning about them. And so that was really a wonderful education, and really primed me to come back to Yankee Publishing in the role at the Old Farmer's Almanac, because if we're about anything, we're for growers, at the Old Farmer's Almanac.
Absolutely. No, I
Yeah.
totally agree. I can't think of a publication that has, I don't know, impacted so many lives over its own, lifespan. And I mean, it must be fascinating working there, and being a part of that whole team.
It is.
Can you give us some history, like maybe
Sure.
about this incredible book?
Well, back in the days when we started, it was 1792, and our founder, Robert B. Thomas, who just celebrated his birthday, April 24th, he was at the helm for almost 50 years. And so when
Wow.
he started out, there were several almanacs. He was in the Boston area, and it answered to all the cities in New England, really, at the time. But they were also regional. So, you might go further down, the coast, and you'd find a different almanac. And so what happened was that he was really good at predicting the weather. And he used a formula that we actually use today. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about the weather. And what he did was he was really into astronomy. And so he took sun science, and really sun spotting and sun activity had been already tracked for a long time at that point. And so he took those cycles and really kind of, we now like crunch data, on a computer, but he really did it by hand. We have some of those original drawings about taking climate science and history of weather, and then the sun science, and really putting it all together and making pretty bold long range forecasts that tended to be more right than wrong. And so, I think from the beginning, everybody who's a gardener, we obsess about the weather. So those two things are pretty connected. And then also, there was so much of what was understood at the time was astronomical, right? And so, even the ideas of planting by the moon phases, and really keeping track of your activities, no matter where you were, by the phases of the moon, because that was your month. Okay, June, now it's time to get, your hay planted, depending on where you are. So I think those were the early successes, and after a time, the other almanacs kind of faded out. And I think also because Robert B. he liked to include humor and entertainment, and this was the only book in the house, oftentimes, besides the Bible, but it also had something relevant, just like the Bible, for every day of the year. And so, it's tending to everything but the spiritual, but many of us also feel like that's part of our growing world too. So it all blended into one. And I think he just was an excellent editor. I think could, read what people wanted. And yes, it is fascinating. It's fascinating to have, it's the oldest continuously published periodical in North America. And so, in times like these, it's kind of nice to look back and be reassured that in 1925, we were still talking about the kitchen garden.
Right.
1975 was the kitchen garden year. 1825, asparagus. I mean, it's just fun to see that things haven't changed in terms of our passions kind of about the ground, but that really our techniques are rooted in tradition, but have really gotten a lot newer and more clever, I think, and also very sustainably focused. And that was true in the beginning also.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I have to ask this because I know. So you brought up moon phases, but before we do that, so I know with the weather, like what percentage of, I mean, surely they track like the accuracy of it. How does that work? And I mean, how do they do that? Because to me, it's just amazing to think that you can track these different things and then project.
Well, we if you read the almanac, and I think we're going to have a little show on like how to use it because I think not everybody does. To read the weather is pretty specific, and so we predict temperature and precipitation. And in doing so, like in some years, this year for this winter, we were very, very close on the amount of precipitation, but we were wrong in so many places. It wasn't snow. For instance, in
Mm,
New England, where I am, we had much more rain than snow, but we had the precipitation levels pretty good, pretty well sussed out. And so we'll see errors like that. But again, we might be almost 100%, predicting what's the amount of rainfall. I will say extreme weather events are
yeah.
more common. And so, thinking about that and aberrations that are local. And I think that's what gardeners and growers feel. And then also some really interesting trends, like as we have some warming parts, the prairies of Canada and US, in the middle of the country, those are really seeing actually a little bit longer winter, kind of a winter hangover and a longer fall. And so they're getting some different things they can grow at the end of the season. They're going to get a longer season than they have in the past, like 10 years ago. So
Mm,
so are we accurate? Yes, we do. And in each issue we publish, but it'll be sort of based on, okay, these cities and, precipitation and temperature. I think we're just really adjusting temperatures warmer and warmer these days. And so so we see a lot of that, but that's helping our accuracy.
interesting. No, that's really fascinating. Well, I'm really glad that you brought up moon phases and moon phase planting because I know we're going to get to this new book on container gardening, and I have some questions about that. But I used to work with an employee that swore by moon phases, and for a year, I tried to do that, and I should have. I wasn't as disciplined as I should have been, but he swore by him and he did it every year. And so I'm curious, but the one thing I can appreciate, and you even said this just a minute ago, is it really helps keep you on schedule. It really helps you with procrastination, like, oh, I got to get this done today. It helps. I mean, it does. So I'm curious how this works and what is the thoughts behind it.
Sure. We get this question a lot. I feel like I always call it everybody's a lunatic. People are super into the moon right now. We're thinking about a moon journal actually, because I think we get tons of questions on it. And so the basic idea is, if you're near an ocean, you know that the moon pulls the water. The tides are controlled by so when it's a full moon, those tides are higher. They're and lower, right? They're in and out more. And so the idea is that we all know that the water table is also under the ground and that there's a ton of water in the earth, and we're water 60%, and plants are probably what 80 or 90% or more depending on the plant. And so the idea is that we too have tides, that the earth that has water in it is also responding in those ways, so that when the
Yeah.
moon is increasing toward full moon, the water is being drawn up and out of the earth. And then when the moon starts to lose light to us, then the water recedes. And so how that corresponds Yes, to timing. Like it's so, I have many gardeners say to me, it's the greatest thing because I'm so distracted. And I say, well, it's this day in the cycle. That's what I should be doing. Because I want to pick from four different things, but it's like, wait, this is the last week. It's my cleanup week. So I'm going to do that. So it has to help that way. But the science behind it is the idea that if anything's fruiting, above ground, or you're trying to maybe have seedlings grow, then you might want to do that when the moon is gaining toward the full moon. And then, if we're talking about wanting to plant roots or plant things that grow their fruits underground, then we want to do that as the moon is waning. And so that's just kind of the basic idea. But then you can really layer on, and so the constellations are astronomical and astrological. But if you layer on the astronomical aspects, you can think about fire, water, air, and think about layering those things even on top of that cycle. And that breaks you down into a few days at a time. And it'll say, well, this is the best for that. Now, I'm not as clear on that. I really have to look at charts for that. But the basic idea, I think it is really wonderful. Like you said, it's just kind of a nice rhythm. And then I think when you start to do it, you feel, if you don't plant your seeds on the exact day, it also gives you a lot of time. It's like, oh, but I don't know about you, but I often wonder, like, well, okay, here's the window I should plant those seeds. It
Right.
gives me a little better indication, like, okay, that's actually the best day or those couple of days.
Right.
So I think that way it can be a nice addition to just what people are doing anyway.
Sure. And I know with flowers and flower farmers and people growing flowers, they're not after vegetables as much, but most of those flowers have fruit above ground. So
Hmm.
you treat them that way. But then I was thinking, as you were talking, I think about like dahlias. I mean, they produce seeds, but then they produce tubers underground like
Exactly.
potatoes. So I guess we treat those like roots, root crops. So,
When you're transplanting, exactly. So if you were going to transplant or propagate or move, then you want to do that when the water's being drawn down, right? And
yeah,
then you're looking to have them blossom. You probably don't want to transplant at that time. So it does give you guidelines if you think about the simple parameters.
sure. Well, the book is always fascinating to me, and I can't imagine the project of creating a new one every single year. Where are you in the cycle for next year? Are you already there, or
We've been doing them once every 2 years. The
okay?
vegetable gardener's handbook has gone through the roof. So that's in its sixth reprint, I believe. And so we just wrapped up the container gardener's handbook, and then I'm working on the house plant book. So it's indoor gardener's handbook. And that'll be all about your friends in the background. Say the top 36 plants. House plants are well, and of course many flower, and so people are so excited to, there's this, I go to everywhere. I'll go to any office space nowadays, and it's just like after the pandemic, there's just like 40 house plants in the gas station. People have
Absolutely.
gone wild. I love it.
I know I do too, actually. Well, it's funny you said the pandemic because during the pandemic, when we were all spending more time at home, one of the things I did was my driveway looked like a vegetable garden in containers. And so,
Yes.
my parents would come by and like, what is he up to now? I had rose bushes in containers and I had tomatoes. And so when I saw this new book on the Container Gardens Handbook, I just thought to myself, okay, this is speaking my language a little bit. I mean, now obviously I'm doing more in garden and in the actual dirt here in the garden, but I mean, I got done planting 2 or 3 containers just the other day. So I was glad to see this new book, and I was glad to kind of talk to you about it because I feel like anybody, everybody can have a container garden.
That's what I love about it.
I know, me too. And it's
So
like,
accessible.
yeah, and it doesn't matter necessarily whether you have full sun or shade, you can plan it accordingly. And so, any tips and pointers, maybe let's start there and like things that people
Sure.
should think about when they go to do this, because I know sometimes you get sucked in, you go to the big box store or the local nursery and you see, oh, I want this and I want that. And not everything is right for every place.
Oh boy, that's the truth. And so yeah, you asked about the book, and really what you're talking about is exactly, I think how it goes is, we have so much material from so many years, and then we also will create new material. But the idea of, obviously, containers just took off, and like you said, it's just accessible to everybody, and it's, I
Yeah.
mean, affordable. Anybody with mobility issues, if you have weather that's kind of wild, you can bring those things inside.
Right.
It really makes it, it makes it, available to everybody. And so what we start out with, the idea for this book is, and many people who are seasoned gardeners like these books just because it goes back to the basics. But what do you need to know? How can you jump in? Yeah, you get addicted. You bought the 12-inch pot at, your garden store. And now what? When do I repot this thing? What do I use? There's so many, soilless mediums, and can I use this or that? And then containers, and then where should they be in the house? Um,
Yeah.
and then putting them outside and bringing them back in, and things that maybe need to overwinter, in a garage. Or I think probably, we laugh at our offices, but the pests and diseases is probably the hardest part to put together. And then also the most useful, because when you have a baby who came down with some kind of bug, or something looks funky on its leaves, it's like you want to run to the emergency room. And so, that's a very big section in the book. But I think it's the idea of thinking through a lot of those things. Like, if your house isn't that big, what windows are best for plants? Like, what light is coming in? So just real basics. I think for me, just the review of materials and how many new materials are available for containers. Again, like you said, if you want to put a vegetable out there, boy, you might need something bigger. Well, get one of those fiberglass containers or cloth bags, and now all of a sudden
Sure.
it's not so heavy. You can move it around. So I think just kind of a lot of those basic considerations. And then, we have millions of pages, I mean, millions of page views on almanac.com. So we can tell what are the most sought after on their plants that people are looking for tips. And we can look at the different questions that are answered. So that's what funnels into the book about, what are people wanting to grow in containers? What are their top questions? And so that's, we even put voices of readers and people that write to us in here, because that's valuable too, to know that somebody else is thinking about this and wants to make it happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned one thing. You were talking about soils and different mediums and things. Do you feel like, and it may depend on the plant, so this might not be a fair question, but overall, do you feel like you should choose different types of soil for container gardens? I get concerned about drainage issues. I also get concerned about, and this is maybe part of the question, but like when it's really warm in the summertime, things drying out so quickly. So,
Yes, we recommend a mix, and we give several kinds of recipes for mix for different types of situations. Exactly what you're saying. I mean, that is the number one downside, right, of containers, is really watering and keeping them fed and watered, just like any living thing. So we give a lot of tips on that. But yes, I mean, we won't go into, but that is really, I think, one of the most useful chapters, is really running through what are the different ingredients in the soil mixes, ideas to create your own for kind of a basic mix. And
mhm,
then, maybe if you have succulents or some other specialty plants, there's ideas for that. But that is really like, a master class in soil. it's, it's,
right.
you know, it's what do we grow in? And like you said, also, with container plants, I think having sterile soil, like the soil that is prepared, less chance of disease and bugs, so there's that, because it isn't often in our houses.
Right. And then a lot of
Yeah.
times too, they include some like pre-mixed fertilizers or compost or things like that, which are helpful and I think is really great. I know one of the things I get excited about too is a lot of florists and people that do growing and things, especially as we're recording this the week of Mother's Day, a lot of them produce containers, or they add that as a service for their clients where they do container gardening. And I think that's another whole side of this that a lot of times people don't think about. That that's a as a florist, that's a service you can provide. You can create those gardens for people, just like a landscape person might do. A architect or a service that does that kind of thing. But we can do that kind of thing, and also a lot of flower farmers can produce. You're growing. I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head now. Well, one of the biggest crops is mums. We produce cut mums for cut mum production, but a lot of those mums can also be container mums that we can sell as a container for people. So yeah, there's a lot to it.
There is, and I feel when I think about the Container Gardener's Handbook, there's a few plants in there where I'm like, huh, like it was. I sort of thought of it more as this, like even a perennial, But then we've stuck it in a pot, and lots of people will do that, and it's just, I think it's fun. It allows for more creativity. In our garden guide this year, we have a fellow who had he has 300 pots in his garden, so he does whole
Wow.
arrangements, and he has to store them off site, and he talks about that process and how he designs with them, and he does that for people also. It's his own garden, the 300, but he does that. I mean, I think that designers really are getting into it because there's very cool containers and very cool plants that you can group them together, and then you can move them around for people that like to change it up.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally agree. And that's cool to see. I know I had I used to have a friend and a customer, and he would have citrus trees in containers. And I know you talked about one of the advantages of containers is you can move it into a protected area when you need to, or what have you. I know it's so funny because this herb pot I brought in for our Zoom chat that's behind me, I planted some sage in the pot and with the other two herbs, and I really didn't expect it to overwinter. But now when it really got cold, of course, I pulled it in the garage or I pulled it somewhere else so that way it wouldn't get the brunt of that. But I was shocked that it overwintered. In fact, it's like in full bloom, and I'm like, I don't know that I've ever had sage bloom on my, just because usually it doesn't make it through the winter. We'll do stuff with it and whatever, but it's kind of like, there's just so many advantages of doing these kinds of things. And I don't know, I just think it's pretty cool. So when did this book get released?
This came out in April.
Okay, so it's just came out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a great book, and I've really enjoyed looking at it. I know one of the things I thought about as I was looking at it, I think about like terracotta pots, and of course I love using terracotta pots, but a lot of times, is there a way, and this is kind of off the cuff question, but I just thought of this, is there a way that we can grow in terracotta and not have them get all funky on the outside?
The pot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. What is that? Is the water?
I mean, when it's algae, it's kind of cool, but sometimes I'm like, okay, this looks like mold or something on it. And I don't know. I just think maybe I just need to.
Great question. I don't know the answer. I could
Well,
look that up. I'll have to get back to you.
yeah.
It's so true. And they don't clean well. Like if
No.
if they get that on them, they're really not, they don't look good.
Well, and I know there's times when I've seen it and I feel like it's like fertilizer salts that have kind of
Yes,
come through the pot and things like
exactly.
that. But I know it's so funny. It's like sometimes I'm like, no, I don't think this is salt. I think this is something else. And it made me just kind of think about that. Okay, so today I knew we were going to be talking, and I wanted to ask this question too. I was outside and I saw my first cicadas.
Oh, yeah.
And I figure, is that, how does that, I mean, what do you guys see with that? Or what have you guys felt? Because I'm like, I guess it's going to be a big year for cicadas.
Well, it's two pods coming out at once. So they're coinciding. Yeah, we have a big story on our website that's getting a lot of hits. I don't think we're expecting, like, they don't do anything. I mean, they're loud, right?
Right.
But they're not gonna, they don't, they don't eat when they're upstairs, do they? I don't
I
think so.
don't think so. Yeah, I don't think
No.
so. It's
It's
just,
like they mate or something and then they go back and that's
yeah.
it.
Yeah, I mean, you start to see their shells, and then you start to see
Yeah,
their little smiling faces, and I don't know. I just thought it was kind of cool and interesting, and I know that
it's
this
so
year
wild.
it is
Yeah.
so wild, and there's going to be so many of them for sure. I just think it's really cool. One thing when it comes to container gardening, do you feel like when you go to create something like there's a recipe or some kind of a formula for, because you see all these beautiful containers and you see them like did they plan that to be so perfect,
I know.
or did they just luck out that these plants all did well together? And I didn't know if maybe you kind of felt like in producing a book like this that maybe you saw a pattern or a formula that I don't know,
Oh,
like floral
sure.
design. Is there something like
Yeah.
that?
Oh, the tried and true is the spiller, the filler, and the thriller. And so when you've got a pot that's big enough for three, and that's all described in here,
I
is
love that.
your thriller is usually it's something tall, maybe an elephant ear or something that's going to spike and really give height. And then your filler is anything like a coleus is great for fillers, or some of those silver leafed things that'll come up to a medium height. But and then your spiller, your classic. Oh, you could do what am I thinking of? The little bitty not geraniums. Why can't I think of the most common flower? And they all
Like
spill.
petunias or things that kind of,
Petunias, that's what I
yeah.
meant. And they all make all the beautiful mini ones now. And so that's the classic for a very, medium, say, size pot. And you can
Uh,
get three, or you can get, maybe two fillers, a thriller, and then a couple of spillers. And that's going to be great. And that's classic. And then we talk
I
about
love
singular
that.
sensations, that really can carry a hanging basket or one pot. But I'll tell you what I see more of now than ever. Now, I think like kind of that's the old way, and I still do that. I'll put a few in a pot, but I see more people doing the singular sensations, filling one pot with one thing, and then making kind of that same arrangement. Like the spiller is in a lower pot, and then so they're making
Oh yeah.
combinations with multiple pots, but in the same idea. So like there's height, there's the middle stuff with some different colors going on, and then you've got your pretty spilling over. But I see it now in a combination of pots instead of one pot. I see a lot of that. People are really, I think, using the different formats and textures of the pots along with the flowers.
I love that.
And
So that's spiller,
thrill.
filler, and thriller.
Yeah. And then singular sensation.
That's right. Right, because I think of like a fuchsia as a singular sensation or something like that. But
Yes.
no, but I like that. That's a good rule of thumb. Is there a rule of thumb? And I know this might seem like a basic question, but is there a rule of thumb when it comes to like how many plants per pot? Or I mean, like, because sometimes and I'm thinking back to my aquarium days when I used to have aquariums, and you're like freshwater fish per gallon, saltwater fish per, like, and I'm thinking, because a lot of times it's Mother's Day again coming up. So I'm thinking, well, I might plant some containers and I want immediate gratification. But then in a month, it's outgrown and it's wild and it's crazy because I didn't plan very well.
Yes, we do talk about that. And it's really kind of plant dependent. And again, like what are you choosing for containers? And we don't really talk, like you said, if you're using a mix, it's got pretty good feeding, good stuff to feed your plants in it. So, you don't really want to fertilize a whole lot more because you will get that overgrowth. You can really
Good
overgrow in your
point.
containers. Um, yeah, so we for everything that we talk about in the book, we'll give like, okay, it needs this much space, and and how many inches and how deep it wants to, what the depth it's going to need. So you can really plan and say, okay, if I want two or three of these and then one of these, you can literally do the math because we'll give you how much space it wants and how tall it will grow. So you can plan on that too, because some of us get surprised when we end up with a 6 foot, you know, annual.
Absolutely. Well, and I know too, it's like with growing cut flowers, a lot of times we've learned to plant things closer than the
Yes.
law allows because it helps with weeds. It might help with elongation and stem length, things like that. Or maybe like sunflowers, the size of the flower is smaller, planting them closer together. And I just feel like a lot of times when these containers get like I know we just were talking about a minute ago with the summer and the heat and try to keep things watered and they get so root bound and there's like almost no soil in the pot by the end of the summer because they've outgrown their container and then you just can't give them enough water almost because
No, it's
I
so
mean
true.
there's times we're having to water twice a day sometimes, depending
Yeah, one
on
of
where you are.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, as in, depending on where you are.
Yeah, and one of the stories and we were working on for the garden guide this year is about what to bring in. You do all this wonderful container gardening and then you're like, oh, it's 50 at night. It's going to get colder, especially where we are. And so what can come in, what can't come in, it's not going to make it, like give up on those. Like rosemary is hard, but for flowers too, like, and we recommend when you have a combination in one pot, you've got to take that apart. And again, you can put them next to each other, but they're not going to do well. They're going to compete. Just like, in the summer, they have enough to compete and all do well, but they won't if you overwinter them. But kind
Right.
of that idea of containers can serve lots of purposes.
Sure. No, that's a great point. That's a great point. Yeah. Well, I'm excited about this book, and I can't wait to dig more into it. With so 2025,
Mhm.
I know you. What's coming down the pipeline for next year?
Well, we've got we'll have the house plant. We probably won't have the house plant book done until the end of next year. So we'll have our annual garden guide, and that comes out in February. And so we've got some fun stories in there. I was thinking, oh, I don't want to give everything away, but we've got a wonderful one on, it's called Home Sweeter Home. That's what we're calling it right now, about fragrant houseplants. So
Oh yeah.
you can just, some bringing that jasmine scent into your home and some other ones. But we also say, don't try gardenias. Don't try that at home. It's too hard. So that's a fun one coming out. We actually are doing our first of an iteration of a garden journal, and it's really just really a journal, but it's got beautiful botanical illustrations. It's got some pages like the language of flowers and flower nomenclature and proverbs and some tips about flowers, but lots of, again, blank pages and places to record things. So that's a new product for us.
Uh-huh.
We see a lot of people interested in journals. One of the most popular things in our book series is the fact that you can write in it. We
Hmm.
have places to, track fertilizer this year, what kind of didn't work, what
Hmm.
colors did I love, and or just, we all we all make mistakes. So it's nice to put those down. And so in response to that, we're giving, we're giving our flower growers some place to really ideate, and brainstorm and just record thoughts. In addition to what's in the garden.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's so important because so many times if it's inconvenient or if it's time wise it's a big time suck, you having that journal handy sometimes is so great. Just go ahead and write it down, go ahead and get it out of your brain into the journal, and that way you can refer to it in the future, when you're making plans and trying to look at how to anticipate next year's challenges or opportunities. So no, I can really appreciate that. The one thing I didn't know either, until we were looking into some stuff about this episode, was that you guys have like a membership site
Yeah.
where, yeah,
Yeah.
you can, like, it's like an annual thing, and you get a ton of stuff in that.
Mhm. Yeah, we have several clubs. The gardening club, you get a book, whatever book we've got out that year. You get the garden guide, you get the Old Farmer's Almanac. You get We have a ton of online newsletters, which I don't know how the online team does it. There's news stories every day. Pink flowers were this week, and there's recipes, everything's seasonal. And so that's really fun. And then we have this other digital magazine called Extra, and that has a ton of great stuff too. Again, seasonal for people that like, it's great on like Kindle, or, an e-reader. It's really
Right.
pretty. And then, yeah, we do some special things for our club members next month. This month, actually, we're going to do. a Zoom with club members and just take top questions so people can send their questions in and the editors will answer the top questions. Again, that's like how we get our best material is listening to our readers because they're really out there with us, and asking the questions. Kind of like you said, like, what the heck about these terracotta pots? It's a
Yeah.
good one. I'm gonna go figure that out. The one that I hear a lot of that we respond to is people that like live in the South and they're like, where's my lilacs? And the people in the North, like, I want a palm. And so, we think about zone cheating. And again, containers come into play in all of those instances, when gardeners are like, wait, I'm glad I don't have the snow, but I really, really miss the lilacs. That's a little bit impossible. But even daffodils, we hear a lot. Like, I miss the daffodils of the South. And so, how can we get that kind of a thing? So again, we like a fig. People up in the north always want to be able to grow figs, and you can, but you need to take that container inside for the winter. So it's containers can be tricks, I guess is what I'm trying to say too. They can really help for people who want to push the season or push the zone, and have it
Sure.
all.
Sure. Gosh, I can't imagine how big a fig gets. At least citrus tends to not get so big so fast, but wow, that'd be crazy bringing a fig
I have
tree
a
inside.
I have a colleague with a lemon tree whose name is Beyonce, and it's doing very well.
Well, if you're gonna, name your lemon tree, why not? I mean, that there
Right?
you go. Well, I know my wife loves. We've talked about trying to do that one time, and have a lemon tree or something like that. And I'm always so nervous because I'm always afraid. Well, the other thing is, which I'm glad you talk about, is like the insects, and I get nervous just having containers outside, and then I bring them inside, and I feel like I need to quarantine them or something before I, put them with the general population of houseplants because
Exactly.
I don't want to bring something in that's gonna like a random spider mite or something. The next thing you know, you got some plague going on in your house.
Yeah,
That can
we
be scary.
recommend bringing them in the daylight so you can catch any hitchhikers. That's one of our tips.
Oh, that's a great idea because I know that's one mistake I often make. Like, oh my goodness, it's going to be cold tomorrow, and yeah, and it's like I just got home from work and it's dark, and yeah, so that's a good tip right there. I tell you,
Right? It just
it's,
seems
it's
it seems
common sense,
basic.
but yeah.
But
Well,
so many of us we get shocked and we say, "Oh, it's so cold all of a sudden that we're running out there at night to go save our babies." And it's like, just plan ahead. It's okay. Get them in the daytime.
yeah, yeah, it'd save your life or save a lot of stress, I'm sure. One of the things I think about too is trends and different trends, and I'm glad you brought up the fact that all this input that you get from your listeners or your readers and anything that you guys are noticing. I know like houseplants seem like they were a big trend, and I don't think that's going away. Obviously, you guys think container gardens is going to continue to be a trend. Anything you're seeing in the future?
Absolutely. I think the biggest thing that we see is like the people really cluing into the well-being benefits of flowers and scents and colors. I think that
Mm,
we're seeing much more interest. As you say, houseplants they gone wild, but really people paying attention to what else can I bring inside? I want aromatic herbs or I want flowers. I want things that are going to enhance my space, but also my mood. I
mm,
think that
sure.
there's so many studies about it now, even the fact of kind of digging in the dirt being, an antidepressant naturally, like, but you can just walk down the street of any university town and probably find a researcher who's looking into it because that's a real trend. And I think that we're seeing that, and you're probably seeing that, people are gravitating toward flowers for those reasons, not just the joy
Yes.
of growing them, but the joy of having them nearby and taking a moment, and sharing them with others too. I think so. We're seeing a lot of that. Um, you know, I guess, yeah, I think a community gardening, but not
Mm,
just for food. So seeing, a lot of places, and I know my first CSA I was at a biodynamic farm for 15 years, and the flower garden, was pick your own. And just like you said, that's how I learned, oh, they're really close together compared to the other plants and why, and how. they taught us how to pick them so that they would continue to propagate. And so I think, we're seeing that community gardens understand that it's not just about food, it's really about flowers bring so much to our lives also. So I think those are some of the trends that we're seeing, and also just the sustainability that turn toward
Mm,
native plants, and then pollinators. So looking at flowers as food, for caterpillars that turn into flying friends, and are helping us with our other pollinating and other bug stuff, eating other bugs.
yeah. Well, I'm really glad to hear that because I feel like that's really the next step in the horticultural evolution on the consumer level is to okay, so we went from, food, then we went to, what's pretty, and then we're going to, this well-being, state. What else? And I feel like growing and giving, and whether it's little starts of plants and, you know passing on the torch, so to speak, or whether it's the fragrance of, like you mentioned, jasmine earlier, and I think of rosemary, and just so many different things that I think that plants add. It's not just the basics, and it's okay because sometimes people, I feel like flowers are a waste of time and space, that we should be focusing more on food. And I think, and I've said this before on our podcast, that I feel like flowers feed our soul. They feed our mental status. They fit, there's benefits, not just not nutritionally, but emotionally. And I feel like I'm really excited to hear that that's a trend you guys are seeing. So,
For sure. We have this cool software. It's a, subscription. It's probably 35 a year, and it's a garden planner. And it's really cool because it just pops up the companion plants. So, if I'm saying I want to do watermelon or something,
mhm.
what's really I love is there's so much science behind it, but it will tell me it's flowers and herbs that want to be by the food. And so that makes sense to me, and so
Yeah.
many of the companion plants that will help them grow better or keep away their one particular pest, they happen to be in the flower or herb family. And so that's not serendipitous, I don't think. I think that's part of a system. And like you said, maybe these trends are us cluing into the fact that it's a whole thing. We need the beauty too.
Mm, yeah. I'm really excited to hear that. So, we always like to wrap up our episodes with an advice question, and I'm super excited to ask you that question. Anything you want to leave with our listeners?
You hinted at it, but my advice is to share. Like, I think that
Mm,
one of the joys of being a grower is that you sometimes have more than you need. And sometimes if you're that flower grower, or you're that, you're growing, you're thinking about it, you're putting seeds in the ground, you're really starting. And so can you put a few extra for some other people? I think that's what we get at in the container gardening handbook, is that it should be accessible to everybody. And sometimes people just need to start. So I was thinking, I had some extra seeds, and I was like, oh, I hate not having enough basil.
oh,
And
amen.
so, you know what I mean? And so I started a whole bunch. I thought that's way too many, but I'm going to put them on the table at work, and people are going to be like, oh, cool, some basil starts, so I feel like, to me, that's one of when you graduate a little bit as a grower, the beauty of being really confident of taking cuttings and rooting that and
Yes.
being able to pass that on, because it helps with your addiction, because you're giving and you might be giving plant and pot away, your pots that they're, the extra pots that didn't get all yucky with the terracotta. But as I think about May, and it's a beautiful time of year, it's like sharing, I think, is the tip.
I love that. And I love that because for a lot of reasons, but a lot of times I know when I'm starting plants and my wife thinks I've lost my mind because I've bought way more seed than could fit on 5 acres, much less my little yard. And it's like, but I know not everything's gonna germinate right, or it's not going to survive because a deer is going to eat it. And I always want to have plan B, right? But I also noticed that, for example, like some of my neighbors enjoy some of the flowers that we have. And in fact, I think I've shared this on the episode already, but it was funny. I didn't really have the space for something I had. It was like I didn't have the right location for it, and I really didn't know what to do. But my neighbor had the perfect spot, and I was like, I don't know if you've got like your perfect landscape plan, but this would be a really great plant for this area. And of course, I was just giving them to him, right? And he was like, "Sure, if you want to, that's fine." And I'm like, "I'll plant them and everything, and I can still enjoy them from my front of my house. I can look and see
Right.
them, and I'll continue to enjoy them as they bloom next year because they're perennial." But it's just, but then it's fun too because they didn't necessarily ever, I think that I could do that,
Right.
and not me but them. And
Yeah.
and it's planting a seed, not just of flowers, but of possibilities for others to get interested in the world of horticulture.
Yeah.
And I think I love your advice. I love that point. And thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much for being on the Flower Podcast.
Oh, it's great. It's always good to talk flowers.
Yeah, absolutely.